Anyone looking to buy a cruising sailboat right now will inevitably need to decide what kind of keel suits their needs the best. If the Bahamas or the Great Loop is on the agenda, a shoal draft is probably ideal. If ocean passages are happening, a full keel or a large fin is probably what you want. But what if you could have both? This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about the Centerboard, and one of the most popular and successful examples of its use, the Tartan 37. I've had lots of requests to talk about this boat, and while I've only been myself on one example of it, it's a very interesting boat for a lot of reasons, key among which is that it seems to check all the boxes for the aspiring cruiser. First, Sparkman and Stevens. Yep, it's one of theirs. And while I could go on and on for days about Sparkman and Stevens because they're my favorite design team and I love everything they've ever made, you just can't go wrong with anything that has their name on it. It'll be beautiful, it'll be well designed, it'll be well mannered under sail, very capable, and it'll also be likely pretty fast. The next box to tick for the aspiring cruiser is usually price. Most of us are looking to get the most bang for our cruising bucks, and we want to keep the price manageable so that we can still have a good cruising kitty to go cruising on. So typically we go out looking for older cruisers from the 80s. The Tartan is right now all over Yacht World for less than 50 grand. Our next goal in a boat, and while they're older boats, is that they're so well built originally that they've stood the test of time and they're still in completely serviceable condition. And that's an important one, but Tartan seems to fit the bill. They built the 37 from 1967 to 1988, and their aim at the time when they designed it was at the more upscale cruiser in the higher end of the spending bracket. The construction of the boat was everything you'd expect, from fiberglass, unidirectional, woven roving, balsa cord deck, but everything was through mounted with thick aluminum backing plates. Even the deck to hull joint is through bolted with an aluminum plate. It's attention to strength that really made this boat stand the test of time. Now, I've spent the last week or so perusing the Tartan 37 Owners Forum, and not many issues come up with this boat. There's a wealth of information there, by the way, and a huge support system. There's just nothing highlighted that's a weak point on this thing. The only thing that seems to come up from time to time, and it's never really been a problem, but a problem in theory, was Tartan's use of dissimilar metals. They seem to have a thing for using aluminum everywhere they could, but with either tapped or through-bolted stainless steel fasteners, and we know now that dissimilar metals can lead to galvanic corrosion, and if you can avoid it, that should be avoided. Now, that's not to say that the Tartan should be avoided. The fasteners just need to be inspected from time to time. When water intrusion gets in there and corrosion starts, the fasteners can give way. Just make sure you can inspect them and make sure nothing's going wrong. The interior work on these boats is said to be outstanding, with well above average for its time and era. And when we're talking about a blue water boat, we talk a lot about the tabbing that goes in between the bulkhead and the hull. So as there's torsion and twist in the boat, the bulkheads serve to keep the boat a straight cylinder, as it were. And the hull tabbing is so overbuilt and so well executed on these boats that nothing has ever gone wrong as far as I've ever found. The downside, though, is the teak interior, and this is the same on most boats from this era. It's dark. It's very dark. Once you get the interior all boarded up at the end of the day and you're inside watching a movie or whatever it is, it's often referred to as a cave, and I can definitely second that idea. Lady K uses the same sort of teak. All the cabin wood, the layout, it's almost all the same, and it does kind of suck. At some point, the industry decided that teak was the only thing that we could have in our sailboat cabins, even though there was a lot brighter and even lighter materials available. That said, I do appreciate the interior of the Tartan 37. It's very well laid out, and it is perfect for a sub 40 footer that's going to be used in the cruising lifestyle. The galley is big, roomy, but tight enough that you can use it while underway. There's always something to lean against. There's loads of room for entertaining guests, and the V-berth is actually big enough that 2 adults could sleep in there for extended periods. Lady K is only 2 feet shorter than this boat, but that 2 feet was directly in her living accommodations, and it shows. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to keep this channel improving. It really makes it all possible, and I really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Okay, so the Tartan is well built. It's roomy. It's reasonably fast because, let's be honest, Sparkman and Stevens, come on. We know lots of them are out there and at fairly good prices for what you get in a boat. So what's the catch? Well, there is one. And depending on how you feel about different keel designs, it can be a pretty big one. We've never talked about centerboard design keels before on this channel, and largely that's because I don't personally like them. My last boat was a CNC Redline 25. I raced it primarily. And it had just such an arrangement for the keel. It was a 2.5 foot shoal draft, which is longer than a fin, but much shorter. And a fixed or a centerboard that would pop out of the bottom of that shoal draft that was 6 feet long. So the arrangement was because the Redline was designed to be fast on all points of sail. Downwind, I would run with the board completely up, and that reduces drag, making you a faster downwind boat or a spinnaker boat. On a beam, I'd have it a quarter to half of the way down. I would play with it a little bit once I got the boat settled, just to get that extra quarter knot out of it, and it helped to be able to play with the keel, and that's not something you can do unless you have a retractable centerboard. And then straight up into the wind, when I want to pound and put the rail down, you put the board all the way down and she'll point almost straight into the wind. It made sense, and she was a very, very capable little boat because of that keel arrangement. So why would we do that on a cruising boat? To be honest with you, it's a best of both worlds thing. I've talked about cruising in the Bahamas with Lady K with my buddy boat at the time, Barefoot 2. Lady K, a Hughes 35, needed 5 feet of water, whereas the Barefoot 2, the Catalina 36, needed 6 feet of water. It doesn't sound like much, but it was rare that we actually anchored in the same location at the end of the day. I would take Lady K into just less than 6 feet of water, knowing I still had 8 or 10 inches under the keel, and I would often anchor with the catamarans up at the beach. Well, the Catalina would have to anchor out with the rest of the monohulls. And sometimes they're as much as a quarter-mile away. And when it comes to the dinghy ride into town in a good chop, a quarter-mile is a long way. I was also able to get into what I consider to be the best anchorage I've ever been to, and one of the most beautiful places on our planet. It's called Norman's Cay. The Catalina, Barefoot 2, and I arrived at Norman's Cay at the same time. And there's what they call Norman's Cay Pond. It's sort of a small lake in the middle of the island, and the entry is uncharted, undredged. There's no buoys, there's nothing. You just have to play it by the color of the water. And sometimes it can be as low as 3 or 4 feet deep in spots, and sometimes the sand comes right out of the water depending on where the tide is. The Catalina wouldn't dare do it, but I did. And I got Lady K in there, and it is, you could fit hundreds of boats in there, but Lady K had it all to herself. And it largely came down to draft. So if you're cruising the Bahamas, draft is really a lot. Now the flip side, on passage, the Catalina could outpoint Lady K by sometimes several degrees, and she was faster on every point of sail except downwind, where Lady K could be a little bit faster. And that makes a huge difference. That can turn a 16-hour day into a 14-hour day. So what if you could have both? So enter the Tartan 37, some CNCs, some Swans. There's a whole slew of boats that make use of this shoal draft keel with a centerboard. And oftentimes the shoal draft keel is less than the depth of Lady K, but with the centerboard down, it's more than the aspect ratio of the Catalina. So you get better than both. It sounds like a pretty good deal, and honestly, it really is. If you're going to do the Great Loop or the East Coast of the US, a shallow boat is going to save you so much stress almost every single day of your passage. For example, getting into an anchorage in Georgia with its 9-foot tide and barely dredged waterways. And then after your trip down to Florida, you're going to find yourself in Biscayne Bay ready to make the run across to Bimini. And you'll be very happy you have the Tartan's almost 8-foot centerboard down to rocket you across the Gulf Stream. And then when you get to the Bahamas, you can pull the board up right back to 4 feet and go anchor with the catamarans right at the beach. Okay, so the big downside. In a word, maintenance. There are some key components to the Tartan's board. First is the pivot point. The board pivots up into a locker inside the shoal draft keel. It doesn't pivot up into a locker inside the cabin, so you actually don't lose any space. It goes right into its own shoal keel. But it pivots on a stainless steel hinge arrangement that you cannot easily inspect. Even if the boat's out of the water, you can't see it. It's not the end of the world, however, because the board itself only weighs about 200 pounds. If you unhook everything during a haul out, you can fairly easily remove the board. It's just an extra step to inspect that hinge, and of course slap some bottom paint up in the locker where the board goes, and that avoids growth. And you'll definitely want to avoid growth, because pivoting centerboards have been known to get stuck in the upright position as sea life and algae and stuff grow up in that locker. It sort of makes friction on the board, and then the board doesn't go down. The next and much more painstaking issue is the mechanism to raise and lower that board. There's a stainless steel eye on the back of the board that a control line attaches to, which then runs into the boat, creating another hole under the water line that you're going to want to inspect as often as you can. From that hole, it runs into a tube and actually runs inside the mast, which is, I think, kind of cool. Once you're above deck, the control line comes out of the mast, so you can use whatever block and tackle arrangement you'd like to manipulate the control line and make the board go up and down. Now, it should be noted that tube comes from the hole in the boat where the line comes through and goes above the water line. So the opportunity for water intrusion into the boat is actually pretty minimal. Another note is that mast stepping becomes more complicated in unstepping. With the mast not being present, something has to hold that control line or the board is going to go all the way down to 8 feet. You also have to use a messenger line through the mast to make sure you can get the control line back in. It's just little things that make it a little bit more complicated. Now, I said earlier that I'm not a big fan of the centerboard idea, and let me run you through the theory and the concepts in my brain that bring me to that point. For me, the cruising boat's number one factor needs to be simplicity. Once you're underway and you're out there cruising, simplicity is everything. Simplicity in the design of the boat, the electrical system, the holes below the waterline, ease of maintenance, and of course problem solving in an emergency. And as most of you know, I happen to know a little something about problem solving in an emergency. When Lady K was sinking off the coast of Saniel Key, I knew, obviously, that there was water coming in below the waterline. I also knew full well from just muscle memory where every hole below the waterline in that boat was and what every seacock arrangement was. Having had a centerboard boat instead, it would have further complicated those vital few minutes when I had to act to either save the boat or lose her entirely. Now, maybe that's an extreme example, and I think that it is. But there is a lot to be said for simplicity when it comes to a cruising boat, and the ease of inspection and maintenance are key in my book. So a regular old fin, or in Lady K's case, a modified fin, would suit me just fine. I would even take a full keel. That would be preferable to me. However, it should be noted that there are a lot of people out there right now making the centerboard work to their advantage. Sailing Solianis is a shining example of an amazing cruising channel. You should check them out. And they actually have this boat with this design of keel. And they really put it through its paces. They've removed the board. They've removed the entire lifting mechanism to rebuild and the hinge and maintenance. And they've done it all of it. And on the Sailing Solianis and their wealth of knowledge on the subject is one more point I want to make. They do tend to only use the board in its down position on very rare occasions. And they admit by their math that that's about 10% of the time that the boat's actually in use. For that 10%, they're very happy to have an 8-foot centerboard. And I would completely agree with that. Crossing the Gulf Stream or racing or anywhere where you need the high pointing and the speed, it makes sense. But honestly, it's 10% of the time. That means 90% of the time, they could do without it. So I'm just, for me, not sure it's worth the maintenance. If you found this episode interesting, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. If you want to see your boat on an episode, please leave it in the comments below. I will see you guys next week.